Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today and an honor to be moderating this panel and the subject on progress or lack thereof on gender equality globally. And I think what we know is that we've actually seen a lot of progress globally in gender equality, particularly in terms of women's education, in terms of lowered rates of maternal mortality, in terms of increased female labor force participation. But we also know that there are a lot of remaining challenges. So we have a study that we publish annually at the World Bank called Women, Business, and the Law that reviews legislation across countries and laws that are discriminatory against women. And the latest issue of Women, Business, and the Law points out that globally, women have only 3/4 of the legal rights of men. And also, half of countries worldwide do not mandate equal pay for equal work. Also, we find very importantly that where legal rights are stronger and women's rights are stronger, you have higher female labor force participation, you have lower rates of vulnerable employment in the informal sector or in jobs that are more vulnerable, and you have higher levels of parliamentary representation. So there's a virtuous circle between legal reforms and some of the outcomes that we see that are so important. We also know that we are facing a period where we're seeing a lot of setbacks and backlash against gender equality, and I think we've all seen this in the world, and we will hear about these experiences today from some of our panelists. So in several countries, we see a rollback in terms of legal rights, things like access to sexual and reproductive health services, and we know that gender-based violence remains pervasive. The World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 3 women globally during her lifetime will be subject to intimate partner violence or sexual violence by a non-partner, and that's just one form of gender-based violence. We also know that child marriage, for example, remains widespread in many areas. We also know that norms and attitudes often can either be a force for progress or can regress, and that often we are now seeing online and in younger generations a resurgence of more conservative norms and attitudes and friction that is arising because of this. So just before I introduce the panel, I want to say that we have a new World Bank Group gender strategy that I had the pleasure of being the technical lead on, and this strategy commits not only our institution, but many of our country partners and development partners around 3 objectives. One is around foundational well-being for ending gender-based violence and promoting human capital, that is the skills, the talent, the health, the education that people have to realize their potential in the world. The second is around economic opportunities, so this has to do with jobs, assets, and access to services like care services, child care, and elder care that are important for people to be able to realize their economic potential. And last but certainly not least, and it's very much in concert with the panel here, is around the importance of leadership and women's leadership in the world, and be that in the workplace or in communities or civil society organizations or in politics. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists and invite them to tell their stories, their gender stories as an opening. And our first panelist is Dr. Nina Ansary, who is an award-winning Iranian-American author, historian, and women's rights and gender equality advocate. And our second panelist is Ambassador Mathilde Mukantabana, I hope I did that right, who is the esteemed ambassador from Rwanda to the United States. She also covers Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. And she has a long track record as a professor, both in California and at the National University of Rwanda. And our last panelist is, sorry, just getting to my notes, is Manizha Wafeq, who is a distinguished development practitioner, an expert in women's economic empowerment, and dedicated policy advocate. She is from Afghanistan, and she has led a number of movements around business and around policy, including around aid, and she will share with us some of her experiences and insights from her career. So without further ado, let me start, Nina, with you. And can you please tell us about the situation of women inside Iran, how they have adapted to the conservative policies that have been in place since the revolution?
Thank you, Laura. It's an honor to be here with the esteemed panelists, and thank you for the kind introduction. Women in Iran for the last 46 years, despite the fact that gender discriminatory policies permeate nearly every facet of Iranian society, have actually one of the very few countries where gender discrimination is embedded in policy, law, and the Constitution, have actually excelled beyond their circumstances. And that is really a testament to their own resilience and determination to shatter the status quo. The last 4.5 decades specifically, there's been a surge in female literacy, and that their education really is the primary source of their empowerment. Women in Iran have been outnumbering men in higher education for decades now. They comprise 65% of university graduates. They are at a 97% literacy and account for 70% of STEM graduates, which is one of the highest in the world. Now, that being said, up until 2 years ago, they were working to reverse a lot of the gender discriminatory laws, and I've initiated numerous groundbreaking campaigns. Secular women were working together with religious women in order to be able to repeal these laws, which in essence are nothing but obstacles in their ways, prevent them from realizing their full potential. But since 2022, that landscape has significantly shifted. Not only are they working towards addressing the gender discriminatory policies, but they are really at the forefront of now wanting regime change. So meaning up until 2 years ago, they were in essence bargaining with patriarchy, they like to call it, even being so bold as to even reinterpret passages in the Quran, which was used by the regime to justify their inferior position. This regime justifies the denigration of women under the guise of religious will. So one of the methods women were resorting to was to show that these passages in the Quran that were being used to denigrate them were in fact fluid and able to be reinterpreted. That's actually a very bold move when you think about it, because when you have hardline clerics that are at the helm, this in many ways is considered blasphemous. Just to give you a glimpse of what they have to contend with, every law that is gender discriminatory, if a woman defies it, it is punishable by up to 74 lashes and or imprisonment, and in the case of countless young women recently, even death. I know a lot of people might be seeing hijab as the forefront of contention. They're not just battling the mandatory veiling laws. The reason the mandatory veiling laws has taken center stage is because it's the most visible form of oppression. And Iranian women aren't fighting to remove the veil, they're fighting to be given a veil choice, which is what they had pre-revolution. But that being said, I want to remind that it is almost impossible for this regime to dispense with the mandatory veiling law, because it is actually one of the ideological pillars of this regime. And the founder of the Islamic Republic in 1980 actually referred to the veil as the flag of the revolution.
Now? Okay. Thank you so much for that dramatic testimony. I think many of us are aware of the plight of women in Iran, but also the importance of their bravery in the face of this, of the difficult laws that are put forward and consequences by the regime. Manizha, I would actually like to turn to you next. And can you please tell us about the plight of women in Afghanistan under the reinstated Taliban regime? What strategies are they using to protect their lives and livelihoods, and what is the situation like there now? Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and great to be with the distinguished panelists. Just before speaking of the plight, Laura, I would like to provide an overview of how Afghan women from 2002 to 2021, when they were given that window of opportunity, a life under partial democratic values, a life under partially conflict-free society, and with freedom, how much they were able to accomplish. And more importantly, I think in connection with the first panel this morning, speaking of foreign policy and engagement with international development and funding international development, it's important for this audience to know that how really Afghan women and Afghan people utilized the international community's presence in Afghanistan. So with that, there were nearly 4 million girls in school. Thousands of girls in higher education. In terms of percentage, 23% of higher education university students were women by the time Taliban retook over the country. 10% women in the leadership of the government as ministers, deputy ministers, directors, ambassadors in various countries. 27% women in the parliament as politicians, policymakers. 25 to 50% women in the provincial councils, and as well as at the rural level community development councils. So even at the grassroots level, and being a very traditional and patriarchal society for many years, that had become possible, and women had stepped up to be part of their community's development. In business, there were over 2,500 formal businesses and another 60,000 plus informal businesses owned by women, and they had created more than 130,000 jobs for women and men. And there were women in media, in sports, in the legal sector, in the non-governmental and civil society, great presence, who were great advocates to change policies in the country. And speaking of policies, we had several laws and policies that were enforced in that window of opportunity that we have had for the gender equality. One of the laws was elimination of violence against women law. The other law was anti-harassment law. And similarly, the policies and other strategies that the government was developing, because of the active role that Afghan women professionals and Afghan women activists were playing, most of them had become gender-aware policies and were encouraging inclusion and gender equality in the country. And when Taliban retook over the country, those women were in the forefront of fighting Taliban. going out on the streets, writing, speaking, and because of them, today, after 3 years, if Taliban are not recognized, is because of the Afghan women's voices. And in terms of their Taliban's restrictions in the last 3 years, we all know a number of those restrictions. But to give you some numbers, over 100 edicts and decrees have been issued just to ban and restrict women and girls from their basic rights to go to school, go to university, go to their jobs, be in the public spaces, have their faces shown, their voices heard. All in all, we call it a gender apartheid situation. And the definition of gender apartheid situation, gender apartheid condition is, at this moment, I don't see any example of it in any other part of the world where in such manner, institutionally and systematically, a group of population, in this case women and girls, are being oppressed and segregated. And I'll leave it here after Master.
Thank you. I think that is a reminder of how quickly situations can change. So thank you for describing the situation before and after that dramatic regime change. But I think also each of you have talked about the courage of the women who are often at the forefront of resisting some of these changes, and how important that is despite the very severe consequences that come with that. So we're going to shift to a brighter spot when it comes to the gender progress, and we're going to hear from now Ambassador Mukantabana. And Ambassador, Rwanda is well known for having made a great deal of progress in gender equality. So can you tell us what progress has been achieved in Rwanda in terms of gender equality and the role that women have played in moving that forward? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura, and good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you on the panel, and I know we've done quite a lot with women in Afghanistan. As a matter of fact, when the Taliban took over, the whole school of girls came to Rwanda. So the whole school, Sola, they came. So even though we are talking about a bright spot, I can't really talk about the transformation of our society without going back to the history that kind of led to women empowerment. I'm not going to go back to describe the genocide that took place 30 years ago. But what it did is that we lost 1 million people. And the few who remained were completely devastated. We lost people who left the country, went through the region. Most of the people who, among the ones who were victimized by genocide, were mostly women. Because number one, even gender ratio went very, very low, and then we had more women who were left, because initially the targeted elements were men in society. So from the get-go, when genocide ended and we started the journey to rebuild our nation with nothing, Rwanda in 1994, we depended completely on aid, 100%. There was nothing left, no infrastructure, no money, no educated people. We are talking about a nation that was totally devastated. So when the new leaders came in, the first thing was to say that in our journey for transformation, we take whatever we have, but every single element, every single person is going to play a key role in our government in every single manner. So women, it was not because of giving rights to women, it was more of really understanding that each person what former the Secretary Hillary was saying, that women's rights is human rights. So we took it not just as a formula, it was real. We had to say women are people, and these are the people who are going to do the transformation of our country. So there was a political will to do so. That's first. And number two, because women proved to be on top of the job. So they had to be integrated from the moment we did it. But our systems, because like many countries in Africa and other places were patriarchal societies, so we had to change many things, including changing our constitution. That allowed women to be, for instance, to own land, because the majority of people were in rural areas, to determine the nationality of the children. All those things were changed in a constitution that was passed in 2003. But also to change the representation. So every single place in our government, at least initially it was 30%, now we have surpassed what we were targeting because women performed. So now we are 61% in parliament, one of the highest in the world, I think. So, and our cabinet is 50-50, men and women. Some of the best portfolio are led by women. If we talk about our technology, that is in the head. It's by women, and many different things that I can talk about. So it was, I can say it was partly because of a vision we had for our community, for our society, for our country, political will from our government, but also the women who were able to open their own sphere of influence by what they were doing during that time. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you so much. And I think that phrase is very apt of the journey of transformation. And certainly Rwanda is a testimony to that journey. And it's very interesting to hear about the role of women in that transformation. So I want to now invite each of you to reflect on what a lot of us here care about, and the focus, of course, of a lot of this work is about what roles and concrete steps can the international community, development organizations, countries through their diplomatic and aid engagement, what role can the international community play, and what steps really can be taken to support progress and advance toward achieving gender equality goals. And who would like to start? Should we start, Mathilde, with you?
Thank you so much. I think the microphone, please. Thank you. Can you hear now? Thank you. It's very important. Thank you so much. And I believe the international I have to say we couldn't have done whatever we've done without the partnership of international community. I can even start with the World Bank, what you have done in your field. So you were part and parcel of our development agenda, especially in inclusion of women, whether it was in the economic arena, to be able to allow them also to be key players in the economy of the country. Because one of the biggest problems for women, at least for Rwandan women, the majority lived in rural areas. So there was no pathway to get funding, even when you were trying to develop anything. So you had all the rights, the political rights, but how are you going to seize the political rights if you don't have any leverage in the economic arena? So that was the job of international partners, and we were lucky to get some of those. And well defined with SDGs and the agenda in Beijing and so on and so forth. And what we did, and I think that partners were happy about with Rwanda, was that we were able to match whatever was coming from outside. There's one of the surest way for failure is when the country is unable to absorb whatever partnerships you can get from any foreign countries or any partners, wherever we are. So that was able to be harnessed during that time. In our situation, we insisted on women in education. Education was the key. We felt that without any solid education, with a population That was for the majority not educated. You know, when we, one example I can give you, after genocide, the schools, they had the collapse. So most of it was really by donors and people coming, starting a school or reviving the old ones. But now also we had the intention of saying, in development, we want also women to be part of STEM programs, for instance. We want women to be ABCD. So it had to be intentional from those partners that are coming from abroad, but going with the national strategy for transformation of the country itself. So it was part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nina, would you like to come in on that question?
Yes, I wanted to say when it comes to countries like Iran and even Afghanistan, where Manizha's from, the issue is not just the gender discriminatory laws. The issue, the overriding issue, for me at least, is that these women who have the courage to defy these laws face brutal repression. And when you're facing brutality from your own government simply for not wanting to wear a piece of cloth, okay, simply for the right to self-determination, that pretty much requires coordinated international response. Now, Iranian women are very adamant they don't want anyone to save them. They very much believe that any transformation has to come from Iranian women themselves, but they need to be seen, they need to be heard, they need to be supported, and part and parcel of that includes foreign policy agenda that actually, for example, Manizha brought up gender apartheid, which is actually a movement that was started by Afghan and Iranian women a couple of years ago. Again, as Manizha said, because of the brutality women face every time they stand up to these gender discriminatory policies. So it's important, when I mean coordinated international response, is to have gender apartheid codified as a crime against humanity. It's important for law practitioners to look at the international human rights law and lack of accountability for governments who undertake atrocities towards their women.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nina. Indeed, I think it's not only financial assistance that the ambassador was talking about, but very much the voice and putting an accent on those problems and raising them that is very key. So please then, let's turn to you, Manizha.
Turn off. Thank you. Exactly, Nina. Coordinated. It was on top of my list as well. The international community definitely need to unify and solidify their action against such regimes, and they have to set an example. Otherwise, it's not going to take long to see similar situations in other countries. And we have already seen a number of countries learning, a number of Muslim majority countries learning from the Taliban's restrictive laws, including the last one, which was a morality law called Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, PVPV law, that a number of countries have started really replicating it. So here we are. It's our responsibility to now, in a coordinated manner, respond to this and really hold Taliban accountable. And one of the accountability would be codifying gender apartheid. There are other recommendations that Afghan women have been advocating for, and those are working with the International Criminal Court, ICC, working with the International Court of Justice, ICJ. Some of the countries like Germany, Canada, Australia, and there were 4 countries, I forgot the other one, they came forward to file a case at the ICJ against Afghanistan using one of the major policies that ICJ is responsible for its enforcement, which is the CEDAW, the Convention for Elimination of all kinds of discrimination against women. So speaking of this document, my other recommendation is that we have the international community, United Nations, and all these multilateral institutions, they have many of such documents. Why aren't they implementing those? Why aren't they using those to really take some practical measures to address these kind of situations? And why are they coming forward and showing that they do not have leverage, they do not have any solution for these kind of situations, whereas they have. Everything is there. It just needs to be implemented. And in case of Afghanistan, we can do a lot to work with youth, with women, NGOs, women in media right now, women in business, all of whom are apart from the government. We can all work with them without really getting involved or engaged with the current authorities. And it's important to really work with these groups, as I mentioned, because the country, not only in terms of gender equality, but also extremism is on rise. And again, that's not only about Afghanistan, it's about the world. So we have to address this in a very unified and solidified manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, I think that's really important what you've said about working oftentimes with the people who are in the countries. So there are a lot of opportunities with youth groups, with women, with others. And also the point you made about leveraging international institutions and conventions. I mean, we do recognize that there's often a big gap between de jure, what's on the books, and de facto, what is applied. But I think we know that there are these fora. You mentioned the International Court of Justice, the World Bank, the UN, certain legal accords that are important. So I know we are a little short on time, and I want to make sure that we're able to get to some questions from the audience. And I know we were supposed to go first to one of the youth, so I don't know who that would be. Is that over here? Very well. So please keep it short, and I would like to also just invite kind of a kickoff framing question, but we're going to turn and gather a few, which is I think we all need to reflect on what are not just obstacles, but some of the solutions that are there. Some of you have already talked about some of that, but I think it would be really good to hear from people. So please, over to you. And please introduce yourself and keep it relatively brief.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Ansary. I'm from the New Mexico World Affairs Council. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for all your work. You guys are remarkable and really inspiring. So my question is, how do you think the U.S. stance on abortion rights, particularly the overturning of Roe v. Wade, might influence global norms and attitudes towards reproductive rights, and what could be the potential impact on domestic policies in your countries and or societal attitudes? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have another question? Okay.
Check. Hi, my name is Tamara Jenkins. I'm part of the Utah Global Diplomacy. And my question kind of goes into the Rwandan ambassador. I got to visit Rwanda in this summer, and something I noticed was like a very prominent issue in Rwanda is currently women who don't have access to economic opportunity. And so I'm wondering if there's like a process or strategy for economic opportunity for rural women, so like access to village serving loans or potentially making a bank.
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe we'll take one more.
Hi, my name is Bella Bielman, and I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, the World Affairs Council of Kentucky and Southern Indiana. And my question is actually about the recent election. I've heard a lot of people say that maybe America is just not ready for a woman president, and that might be one of the reasons that Vice President Harris did not get the presidency. From an outsider's perspective, do you think that America's not ready for a woman president? Thank you.
Okay, well, that is a range of questions. Who would like to start? I think you can take any of the questions that you wish, but there was one that was specific to Rwanda, so maybe we'll start with a specific question to Rwanda about women's access to economic opportunities, especially in rural areas, from our colleague from Utah.
Thank you so much, and thank you for visiting Rwanda. When I started, I said we still have some challenges when it comes to development in rural areas, but Rwanda has done, especially one of the things we've done is to interest young people in agriculture. So, for instance, to give you one example of an amazing partnership that has worked, even from the United States, is to send more than 300 of our young people to study at the University of Nebraska in agriculture. So they come, and now agriculture has become more sexy. The problem we had was that usually whenever a young person grew and became 15, 16, they would try to run away from the village because there was really no future for anybody who was in agriculture and so on and so forth. Now we have started the whole mechanization. People are producing not just for, subsistence, but rather for trade and so on and so forth. Women, if you go, for instance, in whatever products we have on the markets now in Rwanda, actually in the United States, like our coffee, one of the best in the world, like tea, some of them are women who are doing it. So we have microfinance, those really things that can help women in the rural area to be able to have an economic leverage. And then the other thing we've done, especially that was an impediment, is to put clinics all over the country, because without health, without education, and then schools in every single village. Of course, those are, they are in progress, but what I'm saying, at least we have started to see that we have to put a strong emphasis on the development of rural areas. And when we say women, it's everyone really, because we are talking about youth, we are talking about anybody who lives in the rural area, where the majority of Rwandans live. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I think just in general, yes, excellent. The opportunities that people in rural areas, but often including women who actually are very involved in agriculture, especially in developing countries, making sure that they have access to credit and also to value chains. So what Rwanda has done actually in coffee, and it is some of the best coffee in the world, and that's very important to move beyond small-scale home production to be able to have access to those opportunities. So there were two other questions, one from a colleague in New Mexico about US policies on sexual and reproductive health, and specifically Roe v. Wade, and how that might influence policies, and your views on is the US ready for a woman president? So who would like to take that? Please go ahead.
Okay, so I will respond both questions, saying that yes, America is ready for a female president, no doubt. I mean, look at all of you sitting here, all women professionals, and for how long this country have been the world leader. And being a world leader on everything, the rest of the world is looking up at the United States. If United States cannot have a female president, if United States cannot have sexual, reproductive, good policies, abortion rights and everything, then the world will not listen to the US when it comes to gender equality and everything. So I think it's really upon all of us to make sure that this happens here, so we all could go and work with the rest of the world to make sure that gender equality is getting in place. Yeah.
Yes. Very much.
You want to
yeah.
answer the reproductive rights, or I'm stuck with that one? Okay. Okay, so in terms of, is America ready for a female president? Absolutely. The fact that even you're allowed to run for president as a woman, and I'm only mentioning this because I am from Iran, and today a woman is not by law allowed to run for president. So the fact that you can even have a woman run for president is huge. I think we are ready for a female president. The biggest problem that I see in America that is seemingly at the forefront of gender equality is this year the US ranked 43rd on the Global Gender Gap Index, and that is not good. And the reason primarily that has happened, to your question, brings me back to your question, is because although we have a high number of women working, okay, and part of the workforce, we have a low number of women in leadership positions. And when we talk about gender equality, it's not just an ethical and moral imperative. It goes beyond that in terms of it's necessary even from a global perspective for sustainable development. And sustainable development at the end of the day can't be achieved if you don't have approximately equal female representation in anywhere that decisions are made in leadership positions, corporate boards. And that's why, what do? You look at countries that consistently rank in the top 5 or the top 10 of the Global Gender Gap Index. And I always like to look at them and see what they have done in order to be able to achieve not gender equality, no country has achieved full parity, but what accounts for their successes. And I always look at Iceland because Iceland has consistently ranked #1. And what accounts for their successes is basically they implement gender quotas, they implement gender budgeting, they also have implemented equality between the sexes, is explicitly stated in their constitution, and women's rights and gender equality is pretty much mandated by law. So all it takes, what Manizha said, all it takes is for be able to properly implement legal reform, to be able to have political will, to hold people accountable. And it's not, when you think about a country like the US, we should have had a female president, but we don't. We should have more women in leadership positions, but we don't. And it all goes back to legislative loopholes and legalized discrimination, which are kind of blurred and under the radar here, as opposed to a country like Iran or Afghanistan, where the discriminatory policies against women are actually embedded in the Constitution.
Thank you all so much. I just want to add that certainly, and we have a lot of studies that show all of this, but gender equality is not just the right thing to do, it is the smart thing to do. There are studies that show over and over again that having women in the labor force, in positions on corporate boards and leadership positions actually helps economic growth, it helps the bottom line. And it makes sense, right? You do not want to waste the talents of half of your population. So I want to thank our panelists. I want to turn to my colleague to close, and I want to thank all of you.